Hi, this is Julie Murphy with Arizona Farm Bureau. It's Friday, it's 10 o'clock, and it's Talk to a Farmer Friday. We're beginning a new series in this new year. It's still fresh because we have barely moved out of January, but I wanted to do a series with some really embedded ag leaders on the future of Arizona agriculture. And my first guest is Stefanie Smallhouse, Arizona Farm Bureau's president, and also a Southern Arizona rancher with her husband. And I'm just like blanking. You're off of the San Pedro, right?
Yes, yep, in Reddington, Arizona.
In Reddington, Arizona. So we're kind of in a historical place.
Yes, very much so.
The U of A campus, and look, Wildcats. I'm doing this for all of my U of A buddies, and we're celebrating U of A today. So later on, I'm coming back, and I'll be interviewing Shane Burgess or Dean Burgess, and maybe we'll even get into a little bit more of the history of the University of Arizona. But in the meantime, I kind of want to ask you about what your take on the future of Arizona agriculture is. Right off the bat.
That's my first
the
easy questions. Well, in thinking about this question, maybe like in the very near future, right? So we'll start there.
Yeah.
We're at the start of a new year, and so we're obviously creating priorities within Arizona Farm Bureau of things that we want to work on. And but I think just kind of thinking on a broad scale, I think this year is going to be a little bit of a year of uncertainty for agriculture in Arizona. There's a lot of things that are creating a little bit of tension, which isn't unusual in agriculture. As you know, you come from an agricultural family and background. But some things playing into that this year are some uncertainty around policy with water, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit more later. And then, with the election, people don't really know what's going to happen with the economy. Obviously, agriculture is very susceptible to what's happening with the economy because it determines people's food choices and how they shop. It determines our input prices.
Right.
And so I sort of get the feeling from our membership and just from our own operation that 2024 is going to be kind of a year of uncertainty. People just waiting to see what's going to happen, right? Waiting to see if the economy will improve. We're kind of right at the edge of whether we could get better or get worse, right? And then, like in the beef industry, the industry is doing pretty well right now, but anything in agriculture can change at any moment and completely change the markets. And so, if the economy takes a downturn, then the ranchers in Arizona are going to feel that just because people tend to make different food choices as the economy does things like that. So just in brief and short term, I would say just going to be kind of a little bit anxious this year, I think, for agriculture.
Uncertainty is a important word to consider for 2024. Again, some of the policy issues, the water issues. There's a lot of uncertainty in Europe right now. We've got farmers demonstrating. I was just reading a more recent article on that, and just pausing for station identification, so to speak. Again, this is Friday morning, Talk to a Farmer Friday. Hopefully you guys can hear us okay. We've got a tour group, and of course she's got the megaphone, so we've got mics. So hopefully if anybody is on live with us, don't hesitate to ask a question, and also let us know if you can hear us well if you're watching us live. Again, we're on the beautiful University of Arizona campus today. I'm starting a series on the future of farming, and I'm asking a lot of our leaders that are embedded. And so, of course, my first guest this first time out. This series will probably run 2 months, by the way. My first guest today is Stefanie Smallhouse, Arizona Farm Bureau's president, and also a rancher here in Southern Arizona. So despite some of the uncertainty, are you hopeful?
Oh, I'm absolutely hopeful. I think that, if you look in the long term, like I often tell people that if you're in agriculture, you're really living in the long game, so to speak. You think generationally. You're always thinking about the next crop, the next big change you're going to have to make in your operation. And I think when looking in the long term, agriculture as an industry is very adaptive. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we attribute a lot of our efficiencies and our sustainability, and the fact that we really lead the world in food production. So we're very adaptive. So in the long term, even though we have different issues that we're going to be working on, the industry is incredibly resilient. That's a little bit different than the, I worry, I don't worry so much about the industry itself, especially in Arizona, because, we don't farm in this desert climate in spite of it. We farm here because of it. And
not despite, but because of it.
yes,
I love that.
Arizona is an extremely important part of national food security. People don't often think of us as an agricultural hub, but we are incredibly precise with our production. And that's really important for certain reasons, right? And so, in terms of the industry itself in Arizona, in the long term, I don't know how far out you're thinking, Julie, but I'm really optimistic.
Good.
About it. What I worry about is more the people of agriculture, the people that make up agriculture. And the reason I say that is because I think that we really have to stay on top of mental health in agriculture. That's something that we've put a new emphasis on in the last 5 years or so. And that's really because the environment that family farms and ranches operate in is becoming just more and more stressful.
Right.
Right. And so, we have 98% of people in agriculture. Arizona's agricultural statistics are very close to national statistics, right? We mimic those. So if you take 98% of agriculture or family farms, right?
Right.
And then 6% of that 98% are actually the farmers and ranchers, the farm and ranch families who are actually producing most of the food that we produce in the country.
Right.
That's a lot of pressure on that 6% of family farms.
Yeah.
And so...
and most people, the non-Aggie is not going to know that.
Yeah.
That a very small percentage, even within the ag industry, are producing the majority of the food, quality food.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think that, agriculture is the only industry that I'm aware of after trying to think about it, but it's really the only industry I can think of where if you're a professional in that industry, you have to subsidize your own career in order to continue to lose money year after year, right? And so people in agriculture are driven kind of by the big picture. And so it's not really about profitability. I mean, we need to be profitable.
Right.
But what keeps us determined and driven is more just about the big picture of this is what I feel I was meant to do. Well, there's not very, the other 92% of those family farms and ranches have off-farm jobs. And so they're basically subsidizing their own profession.
Yeah.
And that's, that's not something that's very common in a lot of other industries and businesses. And so, that 6% is really the percent that's kind of being squeezed in terms of they're right on the verge of, okay, do I get bigger so that I can absorb costs better? Or do I get smaller and get an off-farm job? And so they're kind of in the middle right now. And those are the folks that I worry about the most in terms of the long-term future.
And to your point, we need to be supporting them. That's why we're instituting some of the things we're instituting resources for, like the mental health issues, because the average human being can only take stress for so long.
Sure.
Unless you're doing things to mitigate that, whether that's counseling, whether that's having good relationships.
Yeah.
And,
and I think, when I look at the changes that have happened over time, we had drastic changes in agriculture, starting in the 19th century. People really, that was the Industrial Revolution, right? So we had a huge, massive exodus from agriculture. And then in the, 20s and 30s, we had another exodus from agriculture because of the economy. People wanted to move to the cities where they could get jobs. And so we've been below 2%, less than 2% of the population for a long time.
Right.
And producing for our country and the rest of the world, really. So we've always managed that with technology, right? So we've always been able to maintain our efficiencies and become more efficient because our resources are limited, whether that's natural resources or human resources, labor. And so even though we seem to always adapt and meet the challenge, and I think we always will continue. And here's a little robot that stopped to talk to us.
And we've confused it.
Yeah.
Bye.
Speaking of technology.
Yeah, speaking of technology.
On the spot.
And we have self-driving tractors on the farm, so
right.
We totally get it.
Technology in action. But the reason I was making that point in terms of the future and am I hopeful, I think I'm sort of the last generation that has one foot in the past of really kind of honoring the tradition and the legacy of how we do agriculture, and one foot in the future, because the rate of change of technology now is so fast that it's like my generation, we see the technology, we know that it can help us, but we don't really want to do it.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? We don't want to learn something new. But the next generations, like my kids, they thrive on change.
Oh, they love it.
They love it. They love new ideas. They love doing things differently.
So hold on, we're competing with another very important technology on the university system.
The challenges of live broadcast, right? But yeah, I feel like this next generation will become even more adaptive than we are. And and I think that's part of our struggles today is that we really want to hold on to the way we were doing things in the past. And that holds you back sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think this next generation will have that issue. They'll be much more responsive to ways that they need to change, and that's a good thing. So that makes me very hopeful.
That is awesome. Pausing again. Again, this is Julie Murphy with Arizona Farm Bureau and Stefanie Smallhouse, our Arizona Farm Bureau president, for Talk to a Farmer Friday, here live on Instagram. We're on the campus of the University of Arizona, which is a perfect spot to start this series, certainly because it's our land-grant university, and certainly because there's some history on this campus that hopefully, as we go through this series, which will probably last about 2 months, I might ask Dean Burgess, who is going to be on this series, a little bit of the history of the University of Arizona. And we have another robot showing up. So Joel, who's behind the scenes, behind the camera, Joel Carr, who's my colleague at Arizona Farm Bureau, do we have any questions or comments? And that's fine if we don't. I just want to make sure we pause long enough. So speaking of history, it's good to look to the past to understand the future. We've got kids that are up and coming. They're excited about the future and the use of technology. But you and your husband represent 140 years of ranching on the Carlink Ranch off of the San Pedro. So I guess one of my questions is, how do you bridge that past and the future? You kind of hinted toward it when you're talking about the new generation that's a little bit more adaptive to technology. And then what do we need to be doing to make sure your son, he's showing all signs that he wants to be on the ranch? How do we manage all that?
Well, I think that a lot of that is when you're making decisions, right? Are you making a decision based on what your most immediate need is today? Or are you making a decision based on what you think that your kids' need is going to be, right? And that's really hard to do. It's really hard to make that kind of that distinction between the two. And, at least on our place, we've always been...
oh my goodness, we're being overrun by the robot.
We obviously are in the robot intersection here.
I think so.
We're obstructing.
That's 3 now.
Yes. But, I think that on our place specifically, and it's not easy, it's certainly not easy to do. And you question yourself constantly, am I making the right decision? Because you are thinking about the next generation. And I think it's a lot just based on, okay, what do I need to do? What technology do I need to adopt on my operation today so that my kids are set to take off running, right? Even though I don't want to do it, you have to think about what is their situation going to be? Will they need this technology to stay up with the markets, to stay up with competition, right? And so I think a lot of it just comes from thinking ahead. In terms of the younger generation, first generation, right? Because that's a big question, right? We have a lot of generations, legacy farms and ranches, that aren't coming back to the farm and ranch. And there's 2 things I wanted to bring up on that. First generation farmers, I have so much respect for.
Especially right now.
Yeah, I think everybody in agriculture has an immense amount of respect for first generation farmers and ranchers. It is a slog to get going. It's a slog to hit the ground running, much less to start from scratch. And so I admire their tenacity and their grit. I admire their adoption of new technologies. I think that agriculture is very cyclical. We just forget that because we're living in the moment. And just when you think you're at the bottom of the curve, you're actually making your way back up to the top, right?
I like that.
And so the folks that are the first generation farmers and ranchers are entering the industry in a different environment. They'll adapt in a different way, and they will grow, and they will get bigger, and then before you know it, they'll have a second generation. And so I think sometimes we get too focused on what's happening in the here and now, right now, and we let that, kind of overcome us. The other thing that I think is important for the next generation of agriculture and bridging that gap, we really need to encourage our kids and even people that are looking for a second cycle of their career that are familiar with agriculture. We really need to encourage them to go into working in policy and in regulatory environments.
Yeah.
It's so important because the people who are working in our agencies in agriculture, you work with more federal agencies, I think, than any other industry. You're constantly interacting with permitting and federal agencies. And yet,
Tuesday was proof of that.
Exactly.
Tuesday evening.
Yeah, exactly. And the challenge is that the folks that are in those agencies today are so far from, we talk about how far removed people are from being on the farm. Well, now we have folks that are very far removed from even knowing somebody that grew up in agriculture, right, or being in a production environment, right? We have a lot of folks working in agencies that were really exposed to rural areas, but now they're having to work with rural communities. And it's not something that can't be learned, but I do just think that it would be helpful if a lot more of the generation that's coming out of rural Arizona and coming off of farms and not wanting to come back to the farm, go to work for a federal land agency, go to work for a regulatory agency, like EPA.
You'll get a regular paycheck.
You get it'll be very consistent, but you'll have an opportunity to make a huge difference for people in agriculture because there'll be somebody on the other side of the table that understands the challenges that we have and can bring that perspective and navigate through these challenges maybe a little bit better than the direction we're going right now.
So you heard it from President Smallhouse. Even if you're thinking of leaving the farm, consider these regulatory agencies.
Yeah, I mean, I started out my career working for the Bureau of Land Management. When I worked there, everyone that worked there had some kind of rural background or agricultural background. Same with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. They're having a very difficult time hiring people, and which I think is really unfortunate because they're great people to work for.
Right.
But I just think a lot of people, you think, oh, I want to work in the agriculture industry. And you think of all these other places, which are great places, right? Ag education, ag technology, input sales. But people don't often think of, well, you know what? I'm going to go work for a federal land management agency, or I'm going to go work for somebody that's, running for office because I'm going to bring that perspective.
You might have, hold on.
This is hilarious. Okay. Now we're being like surrounded.
Just go ahead and move it. Just go ahead and let him. This robot, you know what? They almost have personalities.
What happens if you touch them? What happens if we just move
him? Okay, so he's going. Okay. And now he's going behind. This has been more.
This is AI in action right here. This is a little ice chest trying to figure out how to get around us. That's what it is.
Sorry about that. But so to your point, a lot of times today they might get their degree from a university, land-grant university like this, but they want to do some of the more traditional things that we think of for employment in agriculture, and you're advocating maybe work for some of the state and federal agencies.
Yeah, because we can't, we have to have technology, but we also have to be able to have the right to farm and ranch. Right. We have to be able to work with people. Arizona is mostly a public land state, right? Public, state, tribal. We have to be able to have relationships and work with people in order to do our jobs.
Right.
And right now, that's a huge obstacle in some places of the country, is just trying to just do your job, just farm. Right. And so if we had more folks on the other side of the table that kind of understood that perspective and could bring that to everyone in the workplace, I think that would help us a lot.
Smart. So this is Julie Murphy and President Smallhouse with Talk to a Farmer Friday, live here on Instagram. If you're just joining us live, just know that we're also going to post this as a video so you can watch it later. I know a lot of my followers often look at it later, especially some of my teacher friends that they're in class and they want to watch it later. So we will post it to our Instagram account when we're done with this. But I have one last question for President Smallhouse, because then she has another meeting to go. You're constantly doing meetings, right? And
it's another big part of agriculture.
Right.
Get off the farm and go to some meetings and advocate for yourself and for your industry.
It's a good thing. It's a partnership on the Carlink Ranch.
Yeah.
But I want to ask the water question, which is one of the most important issues right now, and it's our top policy issue at Arizona Farm Bureau. And Tuesday we had a press conference in support of Senate Bill 1221, 1221, which is Senator Kerr's bill, and it's a very important bill that addresses some of the challenges that aren't really addressed in some of the water regulation that we deal with. We call it an AMA or a active management area. But there's a lot of water challenges. So we had the news conference, and then we have the hearing by the Arizona Department of Water Quality, and well over 200 people, if you count online with those that were present, well over 200 people were part of that. And there were a lot of farmers and ranchers that came off the farm. But what's your hope? What's your take? Are you hopeful about our water situation in Arizona, considering some of the crazy, if I may use that word, or challenging political issues with it?
Yeah, I think for those of us in agriculture, it's difficult to be in the environment of politics sometimes, because farming isn't political, it's essential, right? And so we're constantly trying to navigate through kind of this political atmosphere where things don't always make sense.
I know.
And so that's what we're doing right now. And it's going to be, it's going to be a lot of hard work. It's going to require a lot of communication with policymakers from around the state, trying to communicate that, agriculture is here to do the work. We're hardworking people. We can recognize a problem faster than anyone because we deal with the multiple every day.
You're fixing problems every day.
And so it's not a question of whether agriculture wants to work towards a solution of the water challenges that we have. The question is, what does that solution look like? And again, because so many people are far removed from agriculture, it can be difficult to communicate to them that I know that you see this as the solution and you think this is the right answer, but if you were on the farm and you had to live with this solution, let me tell you why that would create more challenges for us. And part of the resiliency in a state is the food production, right? We know that 90% of the public values local food production. And so maintaining the important role that agriculture plays in Arizona is going to be largely dependent on our ability to communicate to the public that we need water. We need water prioritized for food production. And that seems like such a strange thing to have to communicate, but it is. And so we can't just opine about that. We just have to do it. And so we're going to spend a lot of time this year talking about that and promoting SB 1221. I'm sure that there will be people that come to the table and want to see some adjustments to that bill, and that's expected. But the thing that's really important about this particular bill is it's the first time that we've had a bill which addresses groundwater, which reflects the voice of Arizona's farmers and ranchers, Arizona's rural communities, and that we are supportive of. And so it's like, if we know we have a problem, we have a solution on the table, it's better to start from a position of support from the people that you're going to regulate than to start from a position of us pushing back, right?
Right.
And so I really hope that we don't waste this opportunity in Arizona, because of politics, because people just wanting to look backwards instead of forwards. And so I'm really hoping that's the case.
I think this guy is having fun.
I think so.
I know. Somebody's going to have their lunch late because we have another little robot guy that's waiting for us to get out of the way. But one of the things that I think has been so profound with Senate Bill 1221 is it is a solution. And to your point, there will be amendments to it to fix it. But the encouraging thing to what you just said is that there's a lot of support behind it for those rural community people and farmers that will have to address these problems.
Yeah, I can't think of a better starting point than to start from a point where you have support from the people that you're going to regulate. They have an idea, they have a solution. It may not be perfect, right? You got to be open to negotiate, but there's no better place to start from. And for the last 5 years, we've been starting from places that were, completely opposed by rural Arizona. And so obviously that's a difficult place to start from. So that's why I'm encouraged by this, is that I just hope that people see that, you know what, yes, we have pushed back on multiple bills because they weren't right for rural Arizona. This is the right bill for rural Arizona. And if all of us agree that we want to address groundwater issues in very specific areas of the state, then let's work off of this bill. So that's what we're going to work on.
President Smallhouse, thank you so much for taking the time. I hope this was enjoyable, because sometimes the meetings you have to go to are challenging.
Yeah, just like with anything, right? There's very good days and challenging days. You know, people often ask me, what is the greatest challenge to agriculture right now? You know, whether it's in Arizona or, you know, I serve on the national board. And so people ask me that question. And, you know, I'm always thinking of the, you know, well, you know, the farm bill, we got to pass the farm bill, and, you know, we don't have enough labor, and we don't have enough water. And, but, you know, in giving it a little bit more thought, I wanted to make sure and mention today that I actually think the most challenging issue for agriculture today is the division that we have in our culture. Because agriculture's problems do not get solved when people are not willing to collaborate.
Yeah.
All of our issues are bipartisan, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not political. And so the fact that we have so much division in our country and in Arizona right now, as long as that division exists and people aren't willing to come to the table, you know, we won't have a farm bill. We won't have a fix to our labor shortage. We won't have a fix to our water. And so these are things that are real time for agriculture, right? Mm-hmm. You have to have these things today, your crops in the field today. And so every day that goes by, every week, every month, that our policymakers are standing on the hills that they want to die on, agriculture is going away. And so, so I really think that I would say that to anybody that's watching this, that just think about that a little bit in terms of, you know, you can still stand on your principles and on the foundation of your beliefs and the things that are important to you, and go walk into a room to hear other people's perspectives to try and find a solution. And I just don't think we're doing that enough right now.
So the words of wisdom from you is unity. We've got to pray for unity. I might get a little religious here, but just before Jesus went to the cross, one of his most important prayers on behalf of the body of Christ was a prayer of unity. So I think that's what we need to do.
And you know, and I think that's a perfect way to wrap up, because I think people are always surprised how faith-based agriculture community is. But there is no more humbling industry than if you're a farmer or rancher.
Right.
You wake up every day and God reminds you that you are not in control of your situation.
Yeah.
And it's a very humbling experience. You can never totally be an expert on what it is that you do, and you can never have control over the environment that you live in. And so you have to have a lot of humility. And generally, if you have humility, you have faith and optimism. So,
and that's what makes us strong and willing to be resilient in the midst of the crisis. President Smallhouse, thank you for taking this time. Enjoy your next meeting, and always love to have you on our Talk.
Thank you, Julie.
Yes. And thank you, everyone, and have a blessed day.